Students of the light. Yo, yo, and what's up? I'm on vacation. So I'm in a good mood, and we're about ready to fly to Utah. Actually, Park City. And you know what happens in Park City. We go skiing. At least I do. Some people show up there and don't ever take advantage of the mountains. Don't take advantage of even ski lessons, but that's a whole nother story about a lack of venture in people. We got people talking about, well, yeah, get your passport and go see the rest of the world. And most of y'all need to see the rest of the United States. You haven't been anywhere. So I suggest starting at the Grand Canyons, going hiking in Utah during the summer if you don't ski. It's beautiful. And Niagara Falls would be a good, Man, we just had a week of rain. Now it's sunny. It says 60 degrees outside, but it feels like 90. That's because if you're in direct sunlight. So, what did I want to talk about today? I said I would get into real briefly going over some of the biochemistry of the things that I'm talking about, because we got confusion about fats, fatty acids, sugars, how sugar is handled, and so just need a real brief primer on that so you guys can at least get some kind of anchor. So when you go to your doctors, which I don't advise that you do, unless you actually have a plan of what you want to accomplish, you do not go for a checkup. You do not go for a wellness check. If there's nothing wrong with you, there's no need to go. But what I'm trying to do is, number one, prevent things from going wrong. Number two, if things are going wrong, what can be done about it? Remember the basics. Almost all physical disease starts at another plane higher. So what is that plane? That would be the emotional plane. So we've got to clean up the emotional playground. So when someone presents to me with an emotional issue, I'm almost always going to, with a physical issue, I'm almost always going to say, okay, there's something unbalanced emotionally with that person. Not that there's not something that has gone wrong, but typically by the time we're able to diagnose something gone wrong, that something gone wrong, out of balance, has been there for a while. So let's start with the number one problem in the world today, which is lack of nutrition, toxicity, lack of water, and a lack of knowledge. What this channel is about. It's about increasing your knowledge. So let's get into it real briefly. Insulin resistance. It's probably the number one health risk in all of the world, not just in America, but all of the world. What is insulin resistance? What's a good way of looking at it? Insulin is like a conductor that drives, think of it as a driver that drives sugar and sugar molecules intracellularly into the cell. And then the cell shunts it into a particular place called the mitochondria, which is the energy powerhouse of the cell. If you're not familiar with some of these terms, mitochondria, it's probably good just to go look up mitochondria. It's an energy powerhouse of the cell, and it has some of its own genetic material as well. But if you keep, and sugar as a fuel is like, if you've ever been camping or you've been to you have like an indoor fire, and chimney in your homes. If you use the preferred fuel for that fire, which is always going to be wood, And so you put wood on there, and the wood takes a while to get started. It takes a while to burn. And eventually it does. Sometimes you can use starter fluids like, they got these little cans of flammable liquids and newspapers. So the flammable liquids in the newspapers would be like the sugars. And I'm just going to keep it down to glucose and fructose. And for simplicity's sake, I'll keep it to glucose. But we know that sugar is a molecule of glucose, a molecule of sugar. A molecule of fructose. And they get handled differently. So, an insulin is made by your pancreas, called the islets of Langerhans, your beta cells. And so your pancreas secretes the conductor called insulin. Insulin grabs the sugar, shunts it into the cell, mostly going into the liver and mostly into your muscle cells for the majority. Yes, it goes into other cells. So, if this fire gets started, right? You have a fireplace, you're at a campsite, and you have the wood going. The wood is burning at a nice rate, the wood. And then you throw newspaper on top of it. Whoom. Whoom. Yeah, that woof is that fire going, consuming real quickly. So sugar is like that woof. It's not that your body can't consume it. The fire can consume it. It's just that it just woof. And all those woofs, where that fire is going, gets just temporarily, intense and slightly out of control, that's sugar. So can your brain use sugar? Yeah, but it probably prefers ketones. And your heart almost always prefers fats, ketones. We'll talk about that in a second. And for just everyday calm stuff, sugar's for flight or flight, real bursts of energy. So it's not that sugar's not needed. It's just that in the standard American diet, SAD, SAD, there's too much sugar. In the average person's diet, it's too much sugar. When they do a meta-study on peoples across the world, but especially in the United States, who are on welfare, general relief, and food stamps, and the number one drink that they're spending their money on, which is taxpayer money, is Coca-Cola. We got a problem, Houston, because that's that type of flame enhancer that goes woof, and that thing, the more woofing you get, the more of that fire that you bring out of its kind of natural, moderate state. The more you age, the more you set yourself up for disease, and ultimately your body says, "Hey, we can't have." So you keep doing this with the sugar, and your body says, "Hey, this fire is getting a little bit out of control. We're gonna shut down a little bit." So it brings in its cellular mechanisms to block insulin transport or to limit it. That blocking of insulin's ability to conduct sugar into the cell becomes a condition called insulin resistance. And I'm not going to go into detail, we'll go from insulin resistance to more insulin resistance to more insulin resistance. And what happens as we go up the ladder of insulin resistance is that the blood sugar remains the same for a while because your insulin levels are able to rise. This is important. Your insulin levels are able to rise to keep pushing that sugar into the cell because it cannot have it out in the bloodstream just sitting out free in the system because it is toxic. You get a process called glycolation, which is literally the sugarization, fats, protein, cellular membranes, etc. And this starts a problem that we call diabetes. I'm not going to go into what the full effects of diabetes are. It's easy to look up and it's readily available. So by time, and so they will do a certain test when you come in for a doctor's visit. They'll do fasting blood sugar. Should be about 80 to 100. Start getting over the 110, we start getting concerned. At least I do. So that's your fasting blood sugar. It is a one-time look at your blood sugar level and nothing else. It by itself cannot tell us about insulin resistance, what your insulin is doing, and what your cells are doing, but it can give us a little hint, a clue. The second thing they'll do, if it's elevated, they'll say, okay, let's see how your sugars have been running over the last 2 to 3 months. Then they'll do what's called the hemoglobin, HbA1c, the hemoglobin A1c test. Again, that is a test of the sugarization, the glycolation of the proteins in the red blood cells. It is only measuring glucose, though, so just keep that in mind. But it's still a decent test because it can tell if your blood sugars have been elevated over a period of time, and you want your, you certainly want your hemoglobin A1c lower than 6.0, but you really want it lower than 5.5. So you're trying to get it down into the low fives. Below 5 if you can do it, but yes, most of us below 5.5 is a good start. I mean, I freaked out one time when I got mine checked and it was 5.8. I said, oh my God, something's wrong. No, 5.8 is not bad either. I want you to keep in the concept to the age magnifies your sins. In other words, the longer you've been doing something the wrong way, the longer you've been eating the wrong way, the more it gets magnified over age. So if you see somebody that's older and he's healthy, he's able to work out 6 times a week, he's able to go skiing, he's able to, be virile, doesn't have any impotence problems and all that, it means he's probably for a long time been living a healthy lifestyle. Because most people get to a certain age, beyond 50, and things start going downhill. By the time you get into your 60s, you think of yourself as an old man, and by the time you get in your 70s and 80s, you're just sitting there waiting to die. I mean, that's insane. So the insulin resistance, so we go to hemoglobin A1c. We try and keep that below 5.5 at all possible. If it's over 6, you got a problem. But the definitive test, and the only test that I would be concerned with, is your insulin level itself. Let's go to the main hormone, and why don't we measure that? Because see, if we can measure insulin, we can measure a non-fasting insulin, we can measure a fasting insulin. And what's going to happen with those of you who are not diagnosed as insulin resistant, with those of you who are not diagnosed with pre-diabetes, pre-diabetic conditions, and I'll get into what syndrome X is, or pre-diabetic condition, and those of you who are not diagnosed with outright elevated sugar, the first thing that happens in this metabolic cascade from hell because this kills people. And again, over the years, in your 20s, your 30s, by the time you hit your 40s, you're starting to feel what a bad lifestyle, bad eating is, especially with the sugar, because the sugar fuel is the fuel. I'll talk about the other fuel, which is fatty fuel. Your body can also convert through a process called gluconeogenesis from protein to sugar, but that's not normally what it does. It just has the capacity to do that. And so the insulin levels rise, and what's happening at first, woof, 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 they're up and down, up and down. So it is spiking. And this is where we get the glycemic index from. They can measure foods and how those foods spike insulin. And the foods that spike insulin, yes, are the ones that are high in starches and sugars. So you already have insulin resistance now going on, but you don't know it. Your doctor doesn't know it because he's not bright enough to know that had he just gone right to an insulin level, you could do a hemoglobin A1C, but the insulin level will tell him that your insulins are either spiking up and down, which is bad, or things have gotten so out of hand that your insulin levels don't even spike up and down anymore. They just stay elevated. And this is where the cascade of chronic medical disorders happen. From autoimmune, matter of fact, I'll go into that when I talk about fats, but inflammation. I'll say it again, inflammation throughout the whole body. It can come out in the form of autoimmune disease, and most of you are allergic to your cells. I'll talk about that as well. So autoimmune disease of all kinds, vascular disease, hypertension, elevated or dystropic fatty acid profile. And then that's the second thing I'm gonna talk about. Visual problems, hearing problems, dental problems, cardiovascular disease, fatty liver disease, obesity, which now we have over 60% of the people that are clinically obese in the United States. And the obesity, the type of fat that is really, really bad is this visceral fat that covers over the liver and the pancreas. That so-called belly fat it's like its own organ unto itself, but it's full of inflammatory material, as I mentioned before. So inflammation, it is your body's own immune. See, you cannot have inflammation without your body going into action. So you're going to have a hormone that's now chronically elevated that should be going up and then coming down, up and then coming down, nice and easy. None of this woof, 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 all over the place. Nope, nice and easy, right? And you should be burning mainly fat fuel, right? Because that's like the wood, right? Keeps everything nice and calm and peaceful. So the chronically elevated insulin then can lead to liver disease, renal disease, autoimmune disease, thyroid problems, visual problems, dental problems. But the main thing that will kill you ultimately is your kidney shutting down. And for melanated people, black people, the most common end result of that is that you end up with hypertension, you end up on a bunch of medications, you end up with renal insufficiency, or your kidney's not working right, and then you end up on dialysis, and then you end up dead. And this is common in the black community. In other communities, let's say the East Indian community, Caucasian, there's a propensity for your arterial, your coronary arteries, aortic, to become inflamed and then calcified with cholesterol in the arterioles. The inflammation is because there are things being deposited in the endothelium, which is the lining of the arterial walls, and in between, in the arterial walls itself, there are things being deposited that your immune system sees as foreign, saying it shouldn't be there, and it's trying to get it out, and it gets it out. Its reaction is inflammation. If you get a cut or something happens and your body starts to fight against something, your skin turns red. It's inflammation. So inflammation is the fire in the body that is now going out of control. You're literally burning yourself to death. And so any type of disease, it depends on where your genetic weaknesses are. Cancer, you usually see it in the face of chronically elevated insulin. I have nurses that I'm talking with, hemoglobin A1C at 7.5, we know the insulin levels are going to be elevated, but they should get the insulin level, and they need a wake-up call. Cannot be sitting around drinking these energy drinks, these sugar drinks, these highly caffeinated drinks, stuff in aluminum cans, stuff that with fake sugar, real sugar, because remember, your body, if you put something sweet in your mouth, your body sees that as sugar, regardless if it is sugar or not. So you won't get the caloric hit, but you're still going to get the insulin spike. Spike, 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 up, 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 and it just stays elevated. And that chronic elevation and that chronic spiking, but ultimately leading to that chronic elevation. And then the blood sugars go up. And by the time your doctor says, you know what? You've got elevated blood sugar, you've got an elevated hemoglobin A1C, you're diabetic. And then they put you on metformin and other medications. But this is how it develops. It is through the chronic elevation and high elevation of your insulin. This also sets you up for infections. Urinary tract infections. You will not get a urinary tract infection if you're eating properly. Now, it's true that there's a high rate of urinary tract infections postpartum, and that may have that probably, I don't make a big deal of that, because that's probably due to the fact that your whole bladder has been compressed for better part of 6 to 3 months. In the beginning, baby's small, so I'm not talking about the full 9 months, but so it's kind of common to get postpartum UTI. So that I throw out. I'm talking about just a UTI that comes out of nowhere. Because these infections are showing up because they're feeding on the crap, i.e. the sugar that is now spilling out in your urine. So that's another place that you'll see sugar coming out, is in your urine. And so I just wanted to emphasize, we had 25 minutes just with this video. I'll go into the fat one. There'll be a part 2 to this, and I'll probably put it up today or tomorrow. And we'll go into fats, LDL, HDL, cholesterol, polyunsaturated, all that stuff. But right now, if you have some time, go look at the effects and the disease-causing effects and the pro-inflammatory effects, because almost every disease that we know, from Alzheimer's to cancer to thyroid problems to liver problems to renal problems to infections to visual problems to dental problems, which are huge, to connective tissue problems, low back pain problems, which is now epidemic. I mean, if there's a pandemic, it's low back pain problems. If there's a pandemic, it's elevated insulin. Elevated insulin is the pandemic. The rest of that stuff you don't worry about, and your immune system will function a lot better without elevated insulin, because elevated insulin is going to start opening things up and putting things where they don't belong And remember, insulin is a sugar to fat storage hormone as well. So if you're overweight, you can automatically assume that your diet is poor, but you're also insulin resistant. And so you have to eat a diet low in sugar, low in starches, low in carbohydrates. And the best diet is meat and vegetables. Some fruit berries, and that's about it. But I just wanted to explain the cascade of blood sugar. The other test that you'll commonly see is the glucose tolerance test, where you drink a nasty sugar water concoction, and then they measure your blood sugar in phases over, like, say, an hour. So it's an hour glucose tolerance test. You can do a 4-hour glucose tolerance test. They're a waste of time, by the way. And the results that I see from glucose tolerance tests, I pay no attention to. That's why I tell you, don't waste your time with GTT tests. Glucose tolerance tests are a waste of time, and you got to drink sugar water, which is the last fucking thing you want in your body. So I got to test you for something, for a disorder, by giving you toxic sugar water. No. Okay? So glucose tolerance tests, which will monitor over a period of time how your body is dealing with its blood sugar. It's not dealing with how your body and how your pancreas is dealing with its insulin production. It is simply a measure of how your body is dealing with its sugar, which of course insulin is intimately involved with. So you begin to make inferences. I don't like to make inferences. I like to just go right to the top of the food chain. Insulin levels. You go to your doctor, ask for an insulin level. So ask for a hemoglobin A1C and an insulin level. You could post them on the comments. Given those values, I'll tell you what's going on with you. That's all I really need. All right. You have a renal stone, recurrent. You've got insulin resistance, sir. You've got high insulin levels. You've got pulmonary conditions. You've got insulin problems. But remember, behind all of that is the mental and emotional states. How are you managing stress? How are you coping? What is your emotional management system and strategy? And we're going to talk about that. And I'm also going to be putting together at some point, I'll need some help with that, and I have a few people that volunteer, an online 12-step group, because most of you are addicted to alcohol, carbohydrates, and sugar. You're addicts. And one of the things that I will ask you to do at some point is to fast. First, just a 1 meal a day fast, which means you're eating every 24 hours. That's normally how I eat. Then I'll ask you to do a 36-hour fast with water. And then I'll ask you to do a 2-day fast, and then finally a 3-day fast. You don't really need to do more than 3 days. And I guarantee you, because I always get the call, my blood sugar's going low. I'm feeling horrible. It's crashing. And we do the blood levels in there. It's 90. I said, sir or miss, that's normal. Well, why do I feel so miserable? Because you're detoxing and you're a drug addict. You're literally a sugarholic, carboholic, alcoholic, and you're going through withdrawal. So I'll talk about alcohol on another video, because there's different type of alcohols. I mean, there's outright the alcohol that you buy at the store to get a buzz, and some people take it too extreme and they become alcoholics. But yeah, the pleasure centers of the brain that are stimulated by sugar and starches that get converted to sugar are almost on par with the stimulation that you will get in from the use of heroin. So I am walking around, this is why I became a neuropsychiatrist, dealing with addicts, dealing with denial, and dealing with addicts. Your problem is addiction to sugar and starchy foods, processed starchy foods that get converted to sugar. And don't get me started on the vegetable oils and fat and dysfunctional fats that we're taking into our system that are poison. That'll be the next video. I'll get into the fat and the lipid profiles because this video is now at 30 minutes. Okay? Students of the light, you know what time it is. You know what it is. You're an addict. Raise your hand. And I'm going to put together an online 12-step group so we can meet once a week. Y'all can pick out sponsors in your in your area, and you need to work with each other. It's better to work with a group. You can do it alone. There's no problem in doing it alone. But it's better to have a support system. So we'll start a group, a 12-step group, because you're a sugarholic and a carboholic. You're an addict. Freaking straight out junkie. You hear what I'm saying? You're a straight out junkie. I don't want to hear it. And I don't want to hear the excuses. Well, this okay and that okay and this drink that has a 50. No. You're an addict. And addicts are in denial and they make excuses. So remember, at the core of this is always something emotional. There's always an addiction component to it, especially when it comes to food. You have an unnatural relationship to food. I've been there. So I'm not just pointing the finger. I'm pointing the finger at myself too. But I also point the finger at you. All right? So this is done out of love. But you're a straight out goddamn junkie, man. Let's get freaking real about this stuff. Straight out junkie. I'm sorry. If you're gonna be in denial, you can't go this metaphysical path, y'all. If you're gonna be in denial, you can't really go any path that's gonna be successful, because you're never gonna have the right response. You're always gonna be reactive, and you'll never have the right response to a particular situation that requires a certain response. No, because you're in denial. Your whole life is in denial. You've taken the blue pill instead of the red pill. We'll talk about the Matrix in another time. Later, y'all. And I love you.